Welcome to Module 3. We're going to start with a quick meditation. So if you would like to skip to the next slide, go ahead. Otherwise, go ahead and get comfortable and in a good position for breathing and relaxation.
Find a comfortable spot that you can meditate in for the next couple of minutes. And just begin to relax the face. Take some deep breaths in through the nose, out the mouth. Just begin to tap into how you're feeling in this moment. And let's begin by placing your palm over your heart and your other hand on top. Begin to breathe in and out of your heart space. And with each inhale, I invite you to inhale gratitude, bringing that elevated emotion to your heart center. And with each exhale, releasing guilt. Inhale gratitude. Exhale, let go of guilt. Once again, inhale gratitude. Exhale, let go of guilt. And now let the breath flow in and out of your nose. And I invite you to repeat this mantra to yourself for the next minute or so. I let go of all guilt. I make space for gratitude. I let go of all guilt. I make space for gratitude. I let go of all guilt. I make space for gratitude. And just keep repeating this to yourself for the next few breaths. Just letting go and releasing all guilt associated with things that don't serve you, guilt around your food, guilt around other areas of your life. Gently place your hands back on your lap and return to the space, letting your eyes blink open, letting the light in.
All right, just a recap from the last module. Being attuned to your body, it starts with ditching diets, practicing self-care, and eating without distraction. Eating when hungry, but not too hungry, around a level 3 or 4 on the hunger scale is ideal, but not a rule. And you don't always need to feel hungry in order to eat. Remember that practical hunger, taste hunger. There's going to be times when you're not hungry, but it's okay to eat, give yourself that permission. Important reminders: intuitive eating is not a diet. Intuitive eating is not rigid. There are no rules with intuitive eating. And some mantras that we went over at the end of the last module: continue being aware of negative self-talk and dialogue. This is something that you'll work on throughout the modules and forever. A mantra might be, today I will show myself love, or my weight does not define me. Some intentions: actively pay attention to your attunement disruptors. So remember those things that might get in the way of your ability to feel hunger, notice fullness. We'll talk about fullness in a couple modules here, but what about lack of self-care? How are you doing with that? Because a lack of self-care could be an attunement disruptor, getting in the way of that, noticing those signals of your body. Distraction while you're eating. Does this picture look familiar? Eating in front of a computer while you're in a meeting, or, catching up on work, which of course is okay every once in a while, but for every meal or for most meals, you might want to think about what you can do that's less distracting while you're eating so you can truly enjoy your food. Lingering diet beliefs or diet tools, those can definitely be disruptors to noticing and trusting the signals of your body. Just a review of the self-study assignment that I gave at the end of last module. I asked you to start paying attention to your hunger. And on page 51 of the workbook, the Hunger Discovery Scale Journal. I'm wondering if you were able to fill that out. And if you did you discover anything? Did you discover when you tend to eat? Do you tend to eat when you're at a 3 or a 5 or a 2? Did you discover when you tend to end your meal? Maybe do you tend to end when you're comfortable and satisfied and content at that 7? Or do you tend to eat past comfortable fullness at that 10 or beyond? Did you notice any trends? So for example, if you wait too long to eat, did you notice that was generally when you ate to past comfortable fullness? Did you notice any trends like that? We're going to discuss more about this in module 5 when we start to better understand what it feels like to be full. Today, we're going to jump into the third principle, make peace with food, which can be found on pages 61 to 79 of your workbook. Key concepts include diet restraint theory, habituation, food fears, and making peace, giving permission. Diet restraint theory. Diet restraint theory describes what happens when dieters go off their diet or break their food rules or their restrictions. We're going to provide some examples of that on the next slide. I want you to remember the importance of rejecting diet mentality. And I want to ask, do you have foods that you still restrict? Back in module 1, we reviewed different diet tools that you have. And maybe you're still working on getting rid of one or several of those diet tools. But today we're going to start exploring what foods you restrict. Here's the thing. You probably do have foods that you still restrict, and that's okay. The idea wasn't for you to listen to module 1 and 2 and give up all your, food restrictions and rules. We're going to work on talking about those foods that you restrict throughout this module, and you may need to spend more time on this module than any other. Let's talk about the deprivation setup and diet restraint theory. When you're chronically dieting or restricting certain foods, there will always be a rebound effect. And here are a few reasons why. There is the what the heck effect. The what the heck effect meaning you are on a diet, you have multiple restrictions, and maybe one day you decide, I'm going to allow myself this food today. And then once you eat it, basically the gates are open and you think, what the heck, I'm just going to blow it the rest of the day. And then you end up eating more than you normally would. The mere perception of blowing your diet will make you eat past comfortable fullness and more than you normally would. The anticipation of food restriction, just the anticipation of knowing that you're going to be giving up carbs tomorrow or next week will likely make you eat more carbs than you would normally eat if you weren't going to restrict those foods tomorrow or next week. And then the irony of thought suppression, telling yourself, I'm not going to think about carbs or I'm not going to think about whatever it is you're restricting will actually make you think about it more. Think about any kid. If you tell them not to push the red button, all they're going to think about is how much they want to push that red button. The same thing happens with dieting. What about habituation? Habituation explains what happens when you are repeatedly exposed to the same stimulus. It could be a sign on your drive home, a smell in your house, or a food. Essentially, what happens is the novelty begins to wear off. So think of the last time you ate a food so much that you actually got sick of it. I'll give you an example. For me, it was this specific protein bar that I used to eat all the time. It was actually very, very tasty. They come in all different types of flavors and varieties, which really helped keep me enticed and curious and satisfied. After eating one a day for about 4 months, maybe longer, I realized I just wasn't enjoying them anymore and I needed a break. I was officially sick of them. Another example is from when I used to work at Grater's Ice Cream, which is out of Cincinnati, Ohio, the best ice cream in the country. I love Grater's Ice Cream so much. I used to work there in high school, but eating it every day and smelling it every day and serving it to customers every day, I eventually got sick of it. Could you believe it? Essentially, repeated eating of the same food causes a decrease in behavioral and physiological responses. Habituation will happen to everyone and with any food if you give yourself truly unconditional permission to eat that food. We'll discuss more in a moment. I have another example. First, I'm going to read this quote. The more a person is exposed to a certain food, the less appealing it becomes. Think about leftovers. The first night you have your mom's lasagna, it tastes delicious. You have plenty left over as a leftover, and you have it the second day, and it's just still pretty good, not as good. Third day, you feel bad. You don't want it to go to waste. You eat it, and it's just not great. I understand the quality diminishes with time, but also you are habituated to that food. You're officially sick of it. You can't have lasagna anymore. You need a break. So, if you're looking for another example, here's another one. Think of a song that you love and that brings you all the feels and joy. Listen to it now, and you'll feel all those feels. Listen to it all day today, and by the end of the day, you'll want to destroy your playing device and never hear that song again. Those feel-good feelings will turn to feelings of true annoyance. So those are several examples of habituation, and habituation will take place if you allow it to, giving yourself unconditional permission to eat foods. So think about the foods that you currently restrict and the idea of giving yourself unconditional permission to eat those foods. And eventually you'll be habituated to those foods. I'll talk to you more about that in a moment. It does take time, and it can be very scary to think about. Before we go into more about giving yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods, I want to talk about how dieting impedes your ability to reach that habituation. I apologize for the blurry picture, but here we go. I'll review this for you. This image explains how dieting and food restriction will prevent habituation. You start with a diet on the top left, which automatically means there are some forbidden foods, or in the case of maybe intermittent fasting, forbidden times that you can't eat. Next, you inevitably break the restraint because no diet lasts forever. And then next, there's forbidden fruit backlash, where you ultimately engage in a period of uncontrolled rebound eating after all that restriction. Then there's those feelings of guilt. You feel out of control around those foods. And then this leads you to once again believe the problem is you and you must be controlled, and the restraint starts all over again. This is how dieting impedes or prevents habituation. Two other factors that impede habituation are distraction, or constantly eating when constantly eating when distracted. You're not fully present for the food, so you can't, habituation isn't able to happen. You don't even have those subtle cues of taste and flavor. So you're not going to be habituated to that food. You're off somewhere else, your mind, you're thinking about something else. And also stress. Stress can get in the way of habituation. Unconditional permission to eat all foods is the only way to experience habituation. If you allow for it, habituation will occur with even your most sought after foods that you most often restrict, such as, for many people, burgers, fries, cupcakes, ice cream, bread, pasta. So what you think might happen when you allow yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods might be on the left. You'll just eat all of those once restricted foods all day, every day. To be honest, that might happen at first. If you give yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods, and it's foods that you've restricted for a long time, it is a natural tendency for your body to want all those foods. You're going to be hyper aroused by those foods, and they're going to taste delicious, and you're going to just want them all day long. But eventually, if you continue to give yourself that unconditional permission, you're going to actually see more of what you see on that right side of this image. You're still going to eat those other foods, but in addition to the other foods that you enjoy and that provide nutrition and nourishment, whether it's pasta or oatmeal, salads, fruits, vegetables, they're going to eventually find their way into your diet. So essentially what happens is you find that you're eating balanced without it being a rule. It just happens naturally. This brings us to the next voices segment. Today's voice segment is from my mom, Diane Casagrande. Yes, Casagrande is my maiden name. My mom and I have never worked together in a formal way, but I do talk about intuitive eating with her quite often. In this short clip, you will hear about her fears about diving headfirst into intuitive eating. My mom is really still wavering back and forth as to whether intuitive eating is for her. And honestly, she might always be. She is really asking herself whether managing and focusing on her weight is best. If you too are still in this position, you're not alone. And I have an assignment. I want you to write a pro and con list. I'll remind you of this list at the end of the module, or you can pause this now and do this now. What are the pros of an intuitive eating journey for you? And what are the cons? An example of a pro might be, I no longer have to spend time thinking about food. A con might be, my body will change in ways I'm just not ready for. I want you to keep this list with you and add to it as you continue on through these modules and really the rest of your journey. Don't forget about it. Put it in a safe place, maybe wherever you put that letter that you wrote at the beginning in module 1, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Before starting this clip, just a heads up, you may need to increase the volume on your speakers, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Today, I am with my mom, Diane. And actually, my mom is the one who introduced me to intuitive eating many years ago, back in, I would say, probably the mid 1990s, right when the first book was published. And I actually think I read it right around then, too. Probably had no idea what I was really reading. Thankfully, was then reintroduced to it back about 20 years later. So, yeah, I definitely credit my mom for that first introduction to intuitive eating. Mom, you want to say hi? Hi. So I've never actually worked formally with my mom when it comes to intuitive eating. I've never done any coaching with her in a formal setting, but of course we talk about intuitive eating quite a lot. And I talk about her readiness for that unconditional permission to eat piece of the intuitive eating journey. And we've been talking about that a lot lately, especially. And I know a lot of you listening might have some fears that surface when it comes to giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. And I wanted to ask my mom what her fears are when I say, Mom, I think you should really start considering giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. What are the fears that surface for you, Mom?
The big fear, I think, is weight gain, and also just getting a habit of getting out of control and eating too much.
Yeah, weight gain is a common fear, but also one that, in my opinion, indicates that you, Mom, and others listening may still have some diet mentality thoughts to work through. So the desire for weight loss or fear of weight gain is something to sit with and explore, but really try to remind yourself why your ultimate goal is intuitive eating, body trust, and body respect. I think reminding yourself why will help bring you back to intuitive eating. So for example, I want to go down this path because I'm happier when I'm at peace with food in my body. Just even sort of a mantra like that, just a reminder why you're here and why you chose intuitive eating. Something must have brought you here, right? All right. I know you only heard from my mom for just a moment, but I wanted you to hear that having that fear of being out of control around food, especially when we reach this principle of giving yourself unconditional permission to eat, this making food piece, this principle can bring up that fear. I'm going to be out of control around food, or even I'm going to put on weight. Whatever that fear is, you're not the only one. You're not the only one with this fear. It is a natural fear to have. So your wheels may already be spinning as I've started talking about this idea of unconditional permission to eat all foods. At this point, you may be imagining how the heck you're going to move forward, giving yourself this permission. Especially if you've had these restricted foods for so long. This is normal and to be expected. Let's take a deeper look at your current reasons for fearing the idea of unconditional permission to eat. Go ahead and pause this module and fill in the worksheet on page 69. What are your fears? All right, so you've reviewed your own food fears and fears of giving yourself unconditional permission, but here are some other common ones. I already tried, it didn't work. Really think about this. Did you actually have unconditional permission, or were there actual conditions around your eating? So let's think about this. In the back of your mind, when you already tried this, were you thinking, I'll allow myself to eat this today, but then wait a week before I have it again? Or was your unconditional permission situational, such as, I'll allow myself whatever I want on the weekends or at parties, but otherwise I won't? Or perhaps you allow yourself all your favorite foods, but you constantly have guilt surrounding your choices. These are all examples of pseudo permission. And habituation will not take place when you have pseudo permission or conditions around your permission. What about that second one? I won't stop eating the food and I don't trust myself around the food. This is also similar to what my mom said, a common concern, and it's likely based on past experiences. Perhaps the last time you ate one of your forbidden foods and gave yourself permission, you weren't able to stop. But if you think about the reason why you felt uncontrolled around that food, it was likely because in the back of your mind, you assumed you wouldn't be getting that food again for a really long time. Or it could have also been because of the guilt surrounding your food choices, which just made that eating situation almost worse and can make you continue to eat it. Guilt does not help ever. Also remember, when a food is forbidden, your desire for it is heightened. So when you allow yourself a forbidden food, it makes sense that you may lose control around it. And as far as trusting yourself, remember, dieting and rules undermine your self-trust. As you loosen the reins and allow yourself unconditional permission to eat all foods, you'll gradually start picking up on your body's subtle cues and eventually start trusting your body when it comes to food. What about this last one? I won't eat healthy foods. As we continue on through this journey and through this course, you'll eventually get to the part about gentle nutrition. We aren't quite there yet. Obviously, it's actually the last module, and you're still working on body attunement, body trust, and eliminating food rules. But for now, that is good enough. In fact, it's fantastic. Adding more nutritious foods will come soon. The truth is, when you first give yourself unconditional permission to eat, you should expect to eat more of your forbidden foods that have been restricted for so long. And yes, perhaps you'll be thinking less about healthy foods at first. This is normal. It's a normal first part of unconditional permission to eat. But trust in the process and know that eventually you're going to find, thinking back to that image on a couple slides previously, you're going to find that balance happens. At first, you may be eating very different than you're used to, and it might be very scary. But eventually, give it time and have trust, sort of like what Nicole said back in module 1. I remember her saying this. Trust in the process and know that that balance will naturally happen eventually. Are you ready to make peace? I have this picture here because one of the foods that I used to restrict so much was really sugar in general, but especially my favorite food of all time, which is wedding cake, specifically with real buttercream. It has always been one of my favorite foods. Actually, it reminds me of my childhood. My aunt had a bakery and she made the best buttercream. But there was a time in my life when I really restricted it. I didn't allow myself to have it. So I took this picture at one point. This was several years ago when I felt just really at peace with cake and buttercream. So I want you to go ahead and pause until ready and fill out this worksheet. Are you ready to make peace with food? All right. If you answered no to most of the questions on page 74, you may not be ready to make peace, and that's okay. I want you to give yourself some grace. This is not easy, and I want to remind you that just being here, you're doing great. Consider going back to module 2 and reevaluating self-care, or jumping forward to a module that you think would be more helpful based on the answers that you had on that page 74. Maybe module 7 about handling emotions with kindness. Also consider my Nutrition Unmeasured Intuitive Eating program, which progresses at your personal pace. If you answered mostly yes, go ahead and proceed to the next slide. I do want to make it clear too, if you answered mostly no, you are welcome to go to the next slide as well. I want you to do what you are most comfortable with. This is your journey. I want you to make peace as you wish. I want you to make peace when you wish. Permission to eat food can transfer to other areas of your life. Permission to be you, permission to have thoughts and opinions, and permission to say no. I don't expect you to finish this module and make peace before moving on to the next one. All of these principles work together, and as you continue to test new fear foods, you'll find your body trust getting greater. Give yourself full permission to eat all foods is an integral part of the journey, but you can continue this journey while still working on making peace. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about really what it looks like to make peace with 5 different steps. Again, you're going to be working on this throughout these next modules and possibly even for a longer time after that, and that is okay. The 5 steps to make peace with food. And this is directly from the Intuitive Eating Edition 4. The first step is to make a list of all your favorite foods, including foods that you restrict or have rules and conditions around, and foods that you allow fully. Next, put a check mark on the ones that you allow and circle the ones that you restrict or have conditions around. Choose one restricted food to give yourself permission to eat, and go to the store or a restaurant, if that's where you get it, and order or buy that food. Using the tips on page 75 of your workbook, especially numbers 1, 2, and 3, go ahead and eat the food, taking your time and being mindful of the taste. Do you like it? Would you eat it again? Remind yourself, if you like it, you can eat it again. If you don't like it, you never have to. Remember, you're making peace with this food, so I want you to be sure to buy enough when you're at the store or at the restaurant so that you have it at your home when you want it. If that's too scary, just keep going to the restaurant or the grocery store to buy it at your pace, on your own time, when you feel comfortable. In order to have unconditional permission to eat, though, especially at the beginning, it means having easy access. As you're eating the food and feeling the signals of fullness, you need to know when you're hungry again, you can have more. Keep in mind, this should be done at your own pace. Keep in mind, this experience of eating this particular food will be different than when you may have eaten it in the past. In the past, or the last time you ate this food, maybe you were eating this food ravenously. You were ravenous, I should say. You were so hungry, you were hangry. Maybe you hadn't eaten the food in a really long time. Maybe you still had guilt and restriction in the back of your mind and you weren't in the best headspace mentally or physically. This time's going to be different. You'll be in a safe, calm environment. You're going to have pleasant hunger because you're going to know what that feels like, but you're not going to be too hungry. And you're going to give yourself full permission to eat this food without guilt. Finding that contentment will be easier when you don't have restriction and you aren't overly hungry. And eating this food and knowing that you can eat it again later if you want will also be extremely helpful in the process. I would suggest maybe printing this slide or taking a picture of it and keeping it with you over the next several months, however long it takes you to really move through that list of restricted foods. Over the next few months, weeks or months, I want you to fill in the milestone chart on page 77. I'm going to remind you of this at the end of this module. Take your time and go at your own pace. Again, I'll remind you throughout this course to keep trying new fear foods. Here's the thing. Think about that list that you made. You're not going to have to really test or experience each fear or restricted food in order to be successful. You're going to notice after a while, you'll gain more trust in your body. Maybe you do this experiment or these tests with just 1 or 2 of your fear foods. And after a while of giving yourself that unconditional permission and starting to notice habituation, you might notice I'm trusting my body more, and likely you will. This is a process. I really cannot reiterate enough to really take your time with this. In the workbook milestones chart, there are several foods listed, but I would suggest recording your experience with one fear food at a time. You can do it again, choose how you will, but most likely I would suggest trying to reach habituation with just one fear food at a time and then moving on to another. If you have an experience throughout your day that is unplanned, where you give yourself unconditional permission to eat that fear food, write that down in your milestones chart. This doesn't have to be something where you're in a specific space and you plan out this eating situation. That might be helpful for you at first. But if you are somewhere and without even thinking, you order bread on a sandwich, for example, and bread is typically a fear food, first of all, give yourself a pat on the back, a hug, record it. That's a milestone, and add that to your milestones chart. You may eat more than you quote unquote need if it's a food that you've restricted for a while. And I just want to remind you of that. I also want to remind you that that's okay. And, give yourself grace, permission being the key word, instead of being judgmental. Here's the difference. This time, you won't need to keep eating the food for fear that you won't have it again or won't allow yourself the food in a really long time. So even if you find yourself eating more than you normally do, eventually, with continued permission, you're going to remind yourself, you know what? It's still tasting really good to me. I'm really enjoying it, but I'm actually feeling full. And I know that when I'm hungry next, because I have permission, I can eat this again if I want. And maybe you will, and maybe you won't. Remember what prevents habituation. I'm going to just do a quick review here. Dieting and restricting, distraction while eating. So when you decide to start giving yourself unconditional permission to eat certain foods on your list, make sure that you're in a place without distraction, that you can fully be present for the experience. Stress, novelty, and variety. If you think back to the story I told about my protein bar, I probably would have reached habituation with that protein bar much sooner. I would have gotten sick of it much sooner had there not been so many different flavors of that bar. So let me just give you an example. If your fear food that you want to start with is ice cream, pick your favorite flavor and favorite brand and stick with that. Because if you at each situation decide, I'm going to try Rocky Road, I'm going to try mint chocolate chip, those are all different foods. It's going to take you longer to reach habituation. So pick one type of ice cream that you really love and stick with that same flavor and even maybe the same brand if you can, because novelty and variety prevents habituation. And it'll take a lot longer if you add more novelty and more variety to your choices. I want to take just a note to talk about food addiction. Since these food challenges are sometimes met with the sentiment, I think I'm addicted to food, or I can't trust myself around these fear foods, which is why they're fear foods and they're on my restriction list. I want you to keep some things in mind. Food is a basic need, along with water, sleep, love, and shelter. There's actually little to no evidence that food addiction even exists. I want you to imagine putting limits on your liquid consumption. What would happen? You'd think about it endlessly. Imagine the last time you were sleep deprived, like this baby here in the high chair who was clearly sleep deprived. What happened? Likely all you could think about was your bed. The same thing happens when we put restrictions on food. Because food is a basic need, when we put restrictions on it, all we think about is food. And so it might feel like we're addicted. I've heard people say, I feel like I'm hungry all the time. And what I like to say to them is, if you're hungry all the time, then you know what? The best thing you can do is feed your body. When you're hungry all the time, that is a signal and that is a sign that your body needs nourishment. And if you're interested in learning more about food addiction and when it comes to food addiction while trying to make peace with food, there's a really great podcast called Find Your Food Voice, episode number 237, feeling addicted to food while trying to make peace. I highly suggest it. Further learning, Body Kindness by Rebecca Scritchfield, which was in your resources handout, page 50. She talks about how to legalize food in a different way than they do in the intuitive eating book, just if you're interested. Assignments for next time. Continue to fill in your milestones chart on page 77, but only if you answered yes for most questions on page 74. Again, if you answered no for most questions, go ahead and go back to module 2 or even jump ahead to module 7. Do what you feel most comfortable with. If you answered no for most of the questions and you still want to move ahead with a milestones chart, I'm also not going to say you can't. I also want you to create a pro and con list. Here is an example. Pros, and this is for pros and cons of intuitive eating in general. So what are your pros and cons of this journey? A pro might be, I won't have to think about food as much. I'll no longer blame myself for my mistakes in eating. I will learn self-compassion and acceptance. A con may be, I may gain weight. That's scary. What if my partner isn't accepting? I'm scared and afraid of how I may handle my emotions on this journey. Mantras in between now and the next module might look like, my food choices do not define me. I am not good or bad based on the food choices I make. I hope you enjoyed this module, and remember, reach out to me at any time for questions or comments.